This video will follow my progress and ability to learn the song Miracle Love by Matt Corby on the piano. In order to understand how this training program was designed, there are specific concepts and definitions that need to be highlighted. This will build the foundational elements and justification for my training program to learn a song on the piano. The ecological dynamics framework is composed of two key concepts that create the backbone of understanding skill acquisition and the constraints-led approach. These are the dynamical systems theory and ecological psychology. The dynamical systems theory assumes humans or learners as complex biological systems that are composed of many independent but interacting components or subsystems. Due to the highly complex nature of the body, this results in a large number of independent components, also known as degrees of freedom, that need to be controlled in order to perform a specific action. A key aspect to know of complex systems is that they are constantly adapting to their environment to find the most economical, stable state to perform the desired task. The body achieves this through self-organization. Self-organization refers to the idea that stable attractor states will emerge naturally within the performer as a result of constraints placed upon them. This is the organism's way of adapting to perturbances experienced within their environment. The key understanding to take away from these concepts is that organisms are complex systems that aim to self-organize into attractor states under the influence of specific constraints to perform a specific task. Ecological psychology refers to the informational transactions between living organisms and their environment. Put simply, it refers to the perception of information and how that influences actions taken by the individual organism within the environment. This concept acknowledges individuals as open systems, meaning they are biological organisms that have the variable amounts of energy acting on it all the time that influence the actions they take. This then highlights the ability for information to play a considerable role in behavior manipulation through perception-action coupling. Within this concept, key areas need to be addressed: variance and invariance, as well as affordances. Variants refer to aspects of the environment that are changing all the time but have no role in affording action, whereas invariants are stable aspects within the environment that afford action from the individual or organism. Affordances can be defined as invariants within the environment that invite action. The constraints-led approach was developed by Carl Newell in 1986, which created a new framework for skill acquisition methodology. It is crucial to understand that the constraints-led approach has emanated as a method to practically apply the ecological dynamics framework. Constraints have been defined as boundaries which shape and afford the emergence of specific attractor states within a complex system. It is through the natural process of self-organization within the individual that specific steady states relating to movement and cognition are achieved. Newell's constraints-led approach divides constraints into three key categories. First of these are individual or organismic constraints which relate directly to the individual or organism. Within this category, constraints are either functional or structural. Functional constraints relate to things such as individuals' perceptual ability, whereas structural constraints relate directly to the physical attributes of the organism such as height, weight, and age. Second are environmental constraints, which refer to influences such as heat, altitude, playing surface, or family and social support. The last of these is task constraints, which refers directly to aspects of the activity being performed, such as task goals. The correct application of the constraints-led approach is critical in ensuring skills are learnt efficiently and correctly for the individual's context. Initially, the identification of the task and intrinsic dynamics is crucial, as this can shape which constraints need to be manipulated, as the learner may already have skills previously learnt that can be applied to this new context. When learning a skill, self-discovery is the most crucial aspect to ensuring an adaptable, stable state is found and solidified. This allows the individual to organize into a self-made attractor state that allows the task demand to be met. This permits the movement to be individualized and more applicable to the individual. Although evidence suggests that discovery learning as a sole practice can often attain the goal of the task, the means in which it is achieved is inefficient. Therefore, to ensure self-discovery is used effectively, the manipulation of constraints needs to be implemented in order to effectively direct discovery learning. The development of broad perceptual motor landscape is also another crucial aspect of the constraints-led approach. Learners will progressively transition through temporary attractor states whilst learning a skill. As this new stable state emerges, new constraints begin to act on the individual where the stable state aims to resist this. Through this process, a greater repertoire is established within the learner, making them more adaptable to variability within the performance environment. The most influential factor of the constraints-led approach is the manipulation of different constraints to guide the learner into new attractor states that are more effective and efficient at dealing with the specific task demand. This may be aiding in the development of a segment of the task or the skill as a whole. Through the manipulation of task, environment, or individual constraints, as well as the manipulation of informational and physical constraints, the practitioner is able to guide the learner to self-discover into new attractor states. This allows the skill to be broken down into segments, learnt in a partial manner, and then built back up together in a manner that allows for self-discovery. This is done as if I were to try and play, coordinating two hands playing different chords using the pedal and trying to stay in time. I would be extremely overwhelmed and not be able to play due to the excessive attention demands. The skill I will be learning has been created to be specific due to the short nature of the acquisition period. I'll attempt to learn the song Miracle Love by Matt Corby in the key of D major. The nature of this song is mostly chords based, making it more realistic to learn as a beginner. The piano is a highly complex serial skill that requires the control of many degrees of freedom. This training program was broken into 4 weeks, with 5 one-hour sessions per week. The aim of this program was to isolate specific skills and allow myself to find attractor states within those simplified skills through freezing degrees of freedom. Once attractor states were found, I would begin to unfreeze degrees of freedom to close replicate the required end goal. Through these different difficulty stages, different constraints would be manipulated. The table below demonstrates a summarized program with what constraints were manipulated. The first week had an overarching goal to learn all the chords that are required in the song and be able to transition between these in a random order with a 3-second changing period. The first session consisted of mostly research trying to understand how a keyboard was laid out, the basic notes of the keyboard, and what chords I would need to learn for the song, which I then just had fun playing around trying to understand the instrument and how it worked. Session 2 was the first session where I began to manipulate constraints to begin the acquisition of the skill. Due to the many degrees of freedom with this skill, I decided to isolate the 3 independent limbs in order to freeze some of the degrees of freedom. This involved eliminating the pedal temporarily and also learning the chords for just the right hand. I had sheets of paper that showed the chords that I need to be played out, but only with the keys being highlighted as shown here. No other information was given in order to allow self-discovery and a temporary attractor state to be found. The following 3 sessions were similar in nature to the others, however with the introduction of the left hand in session 4 and aiming to play the chords in their entirety in session 5 in random order. I personally struggled with hitting the right keys due to them all looking the same. In session 3 I manipulated the informational constraints of vision in order to assist in creating affordances for action, reducing the cognitive load through improving my capacity for information movement coupling. This was a temporary measure that I introduced where I marked the keys for each chord with a colour to assist with the spatial orientation when playing. Below is an excerpt from session 4 of this week. This involved randomised chord progressions, no pedal use, which can be noticed due to no sustain of the chords, and coloured keys on the keyboard. The overarching goal of this week was to play the chords learnt in week 1 and apply them in a specific order of the song itself. This involved many sessions with task variability such as tempo changes and the partial introduction of a metronome to the end portion of practice sessions to improve fluidity of playing. This week also began the learning of the song in its more structured form. Due to the specific nature of the skill, it is crucial that I don't fixate on just learning the components but also apply these to the song itself. The exemplar session of this week was session 4, which had an individual aim of improving the progression sequence of the pre-chorus and chorus. To improve overall performance, I would randomly change from one to the other to create variability within practice, increasing error rate in turn encouraging myself to find a beneficial attractor state. Example of the drills I used were the 10-minute randomized warm-up, practicing between the pre-chorus and chorus with the song playing, as well as the introduction of a metronome to assist in developing fluidity and to encourage counting of beats whilst playing. The end of this session also included 5 minutes of low-light playing. Here's a snippet of the session. Week 3, the core goal focus was to begin to learn the segments individually as continued from week 2, but with the addition of the piano pedal as well as the aim of improving fluidity. This week involved a variation of lesson types. The first lesson was a teacher lesson where I received feedback throughout the lesson on topics such as technique and fluidity and ways that I could experiment to help improve my playing ability. However, demonstration was not used as researchers stated that this can hinder learning. This week's sessions also include the breaking down of the song segments and learning them separately, building through the week to learn to play them together. Session 4 had many variables that were introduced, making this quite a difficult session. The addition of the pedal and metronome to vary playing speeds created a lot more cognitive demands, taking away from concentration from playing just the chords, creating considerable error. In reflection, I could have taken away the metronome to just focus on the pedal introduction. Through manipulating these task constraints, I was able to create a resistance towards my current attractor state, forcing myself to find a new way to incorporate the pedal. Here is session 4 from week 3. This was the final week of practice and therefore was more closely tailored to bringing it all together. This would involve taking out the pedal initially to improve transitions between segments, ensuring they are fluid and in time. For the last 4 sessions, the main manipulation was learning to play through the entire song with and without the song in the back, with varying timings and lighting environments. This allowed all the compartmental skills learned in the last 3 weeks to be applied cohesively and practiced. These sessions each had different goals, although all looked quite similar in nature, with many variations of speed being applied, the continued use of the pedal, and using the song in some context to assist with the fluidity and timing. The exemplar session for this week involved complete playthroughs of the song with both metronome influence and low light in some aspects to change the task and environmental constraints. Here's a snippet. Throughout this entire practice schedule, different assessments were being applied to track whether I was making progress through this practice. Assess my development by comparing start to end results, whilst also being able to assess throughout the practice timeline whether I was competent enough to progress and whether the sessions needed to be adapted throughout. To assess my chord changing capacities, a random chord progression of 12 changes would be used at the end of each week to assess my ability to play chords in a variable manner. This provided an indication of whether I was improving through comparing the amount of errors I made week to week. Errors included playing a wrong note, playing outside of the given time period of 2 seconds, or playing the wrong chord. As can be seen on the graph, I make a gradual improvement overall, with making approximately 6 errors in week 1 to 1 error in week 4. Although this is not exactly specific to the skill, it gave an indication of whether my general piano playing abilities were improving. From the end of week 2, I also began playing through different progressions, playing each 3 times and accumulating the errors for each one. This gave an indication of whether my ability and progression was transferring directly to the skill, and also highlighted portions of the song that may need more focus. As can be seen in figure 2, I made around 7 errors initially, with the final assessment showing no errors, indicating an improvement in performance and transfers of skills learnt. Lastly, for the final 2 weeks, a final assessment of playing through the song, I would send my friend, who is an accomplished piano player, to subjectively assess my capabilities to play in a fluid manner, play in time, and to count errors that I made when playing through the song. From reflections with my teacher, I'm still not quite accomplished in my ability to play in a fluid manner. However, I have sound timing and error rate of playing throughout the song was 0. Overall, I think this was an effective training program. The results from consistent assessment throughout the assignment showed that I was able to make improvements and effectively learn the skill in the 20-hour period. As proposed by Newell, the learning process is highly individualized and dependent on the intrinsic dynamics of the learner and the requirements of the skill. This was reflected in certain aspects of the training process, such as learning the music theory and understanding the timing of the song. Due to playing the guitar for 7 years, I have a good understanding of music theory and timing, and was able to understand that this song was in 3/4, meaning that some chords would be on the offbeat. A strength of the training program was the methodology to plan what I would practice at the start of each week, with room for adaptation throughout the week. This allowed for the learning process to be highly individualized, meaning I could regress on an aspect of the skill if it was too difficult, or progress at the more fastened rate. Examples of these were placing the colors of the keys on the keyboard to regress the skill slightly and delay the use of the pedal, as I found it difficult first time playing with the pedal. Another strength of this program was the specificity and variability of the tasks I used to acquire the skill. I was able to break down the skill into simple parts, like chords, rhythm, speed, pedal use, as well as other factors, and create temporary attractor states within each of these skills. I was then able to progress these by making them more difficult and relevant to the skill, or combining them together to increase the degrees of freedom and put resistance on the skill to afford a new attractor state. A weakness of this program was my failure to address environmental constraints comprehensively. I paid no attention to potential constraints such as where I was playing and my positioning whilst playing. I also did not factor in my ability to play with limited auditory feedback, as this is a constant natural feedback system used with the skill that I was completely dependent on, and without would not be able to play coherently. At the conclusion of my training program, I had acquired my skill. Although this was achieved, improvements could have been made to the program. Firstly, having a greater variability in the playing environment would assist in my ability to play in differing contexts and improve my adaptability. For example, if I had to play in a noisy room and hearing was limited, I would not be successful due to my low exposure to that specific constraint. However, if I had to play in a dark room, then I would have more success at that due to my consistent exposure to that constraint. Secondly, I'd only learnt the song in one specific key. If I would want to play in a live context with other musicians and the key needed to be different, I would not have the success performing the skill due to a very narrow window of ability. Lastly, although I played at differing tempos throughout practice, I never played with other musicians to develop my ability to adapt on the fly and react to more unforeseen perturbances, such as slight tempo changes or wrong chords, which would most likely cause me to make a mistake. Therefore, next time in the last 2 weeks of practice, I would begin to introduce a training environment that is more dynamic, having the potential for random change.